Hello, welcome to Cooking by the Books. I am Jill Allen, and this month we are going to be making soup and stew. The days are getting colder and shorter, so we all crave that warm bowl of comfort. So the first recipe we're going to make comes from the book Small Victories. We're making Parmesan soup with tiny pasta and peas. This is a really intriguing recipe to me because it uses Parmesan rinds as its primary flavor in the soup. These are the ends from blocks of Parmesan cheese. You can save them in your freezer until you have enough to make soup. It's also good if you're making tomato sauce or, a whole variety of soups. You can throw a chunk of rind in there to give it some additional flavor. So you need about a cup of Parmesan rind, an onion chopped up with the skin on. This is to make the stock, and the skin of onions will give it a golden color. We also put in 4 minced cloves of garlic. All of this goes into 6 cups of water, and we will boil it. This is kind of a quick soup. You only have to boil it for about 10 minutes. And then we will strain it and add the other ingredients, which are a cup of tiny pasta. We're going to use ditalini since that's what I have, and then a cup of frozen peas. Very simple soup, great for lunch or a starter for dinner. So let's get this going. You can see we've got everything in here. We'll check back in a bit. All right, this has been boiling for about 5 minutes. You can see the onions are starting to break down. The cheese is melting into the water, and the color of the broth is getting kind of golden. We're gonna give it about 10 more minutes, and then we'll strain it. So stay tuned. It's been about 10 minutes. The onions are soft, the broth is golden. We're gonna strain it now to get the onions and cheese rinds out of it before carrying on with our recipe. You can see that the cheese gets a little melty and gooey. I'm kind of afraid to see what the bottom of my pot looks like, but here we go. You can see how golden the broth is. Whoops, I'm making a bit of a mess. Okay, I can clean up after myself. Yeah, and the bottom of the pot's a little gooey. Let me give this a quick cleaning before we proceed. Stay tuned. All right, I've strained the broth. You can see it's got this lovely golden color. I cleaned the pot. The Parmesan rinds do stick to the bottom, but they can be scraped off. So let's add the broth to the pot. And at this point, we're going to add our small pasta and cook it in the broth. That will add some starch to the broth, which will thicken it a bit and give it some body. So here we go. It doesn't take long to cook this pasta, maybe 8 minutes, and then we'll add the peas last. You can add frozen peas directly from the freezer or just let them sit at room temperature till they thaw. Either is fine, they cook super quickly. All right, we'll check back. All right, the pasta is cooked. Now we will add the peas. They'll just take a minute to heat through. And then we can see how this turned out. It smells really good. It smells like an Italian restaurant. Something about Parmesan cheese. So you can, see how this is looking now. I'm thinking It's probably heated those peas up enough. Let's take a ladleful and see. I'll just put a little in here. A little fresh pepper on there. Since I'm a saltaholic, I'm going to add a little salt to taste. Now this is the type of soup where you definitely want to taste it before adding salt, because Parmesan can range in saltiness. You could wind up with a really salty broth or more of a savory broth needing a bit of punch from the salt, which mine seems to need a little more punch. I'm also going to put a little sprinkle of Parmesan on top just for a little garnish. You can see this is a very pretty looking soup. I like the little pop of green in there. It's also probably pretty hot, but let's see. Ooh, it does, still steaming. That's delicious. This would be really good for lunch. See, I have to have another bite because it's that good. This would be really great for lunch with a soup, with a salad on the side, or, oh boy, this would be a great start to a pasta meal. I could see myself eating this for breakfast. Our next recipe comes from the book How to Cook Everything by Mark Bittman. This recipe is for garlicky white bean soup. Now I love Mark Bittman's cookbooks because he really does break down all of his recipes into easy steps and gives a lot of variations on how to make it easier, how to make it more complicated. So this one, you can start with either dried beans and cook them from scratch, or we can go super simple and use canned white beans. So we are going to start with 6 cups of broth. I have a pork broth in here, and add the 2 cans of drained white beans. Oops, let's get all of that in there. It also uses an entire head of garlic that you peel the cloves and mince them. The recipe also calls for a tablespoon of minced fresh rosemary. You could also use dried, but my garden is still providing, so in it goes. And we're going to bring this to a boil and let it boil long enough for the beans to start breaking apart somewhat. And once we're there, we'll take a look. So catch you in a minute. All right, this has been boiling for a bit. So I think it's ready for the next step, which is to mash the beans somewhat. Now you could use an immersion blender or even a countertop blender if you wanted a really smooth pureed soup, but I kind of like a little bit of texture in my bean soups. So I'm gonna go ahead and just use a potato masher and lightly mash it. And then we will try it. This smells really good. I used a pork broth, a pork stock that I had made and had in the freezer. And I think it gives it a really nice scent. You know, this would be, white bean soup would also be good with ham, like a ham bone or a chunked up ham thrown in there, or a little bacon on top. But it's also perfectly fine to keep it a vegetarian soup. Beans have a lot of protein, and they also fill you up, and they're very satisfying. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. All right, let me put this in the bowl. I'm just gonna put a little bit in there. And I'll add some salt and pepper. I find the broth is kind of salty, my pork broth, so I'm only going to add just a little bit of salt. And also, as a garnish, just a little dribble of olive oil to add some body to it. Also, olive oil goes really well with rosemary flavored foods. So you can see that this just looks warm and delicious. And now comes my favorite part, tasting it. All right, looks like it's about 1,000 degrees, which is about the way I like my soup. That's really good. It is super garlicky, which would be so satisfying on a really cold day. All right, our next recipe is a beef and barley stew. And this comes from the New England Soup Factory cookbook. This is kind of a complicated recipe. It's got multiple steps. So the first thing you do is you take your 3 pounds of beef and you take half a cup of red wine vinegar and 2 teaspoons of salt. You put it in a pot, cover it with water, and let it cook for about an hour and a half to get the beef really tender. So I've gone ahead and done that step already ahead of time. So we've got the cooked beef here and it is really falling apart tender. The next thing we need is 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and we are going to saute in that a chopped onion, 2 celery stalks, 6 diced carrots, and 3 garlic cloves. So we're going to get that going in here. And then we add a can of tomato paste, a cup of red wine, 2 bay leaves, 8 cups of beef stock, and half a pound of barley. So first step, let's get the celery, onion, and carrots and garlic sauteed until they're soft. That'll take a few minutes. All right, you can see that this is sauteing nicely. It smells really good. Now we can start adding some of the other ingredients. So we will add the wine, which is lovely. Let me add the beef. All right. We'll drop in the bay leaves. We'll want to fish these out at the end. It's not that they aren't edible. It's just bay leaves never really soften when they cook, and they pose a bit of a choking hazard, like they're spiny, and if you got one in your mouth, it would not be a very pleasant experience. But they're easy enough to find. We'll add our tomato paste. All right. Super. Our barley, and it's half a pound of barley, and then our beef broth. And I'm going to use store-bought beef broth, but also when I cooked the beef at the beginning, I saved the broth from that, and I thought it was very tasty and flavorful. So we're going to use that for some of it. I might not use both of these. So let me add some of that. I'm pushing the limit on the size and the amount of ingredients I can fit in this pan. Alas, this is the only pan I have in the house that works on my induction cooktop. So this will be just crammed in. I will have to watch it to be sure it doesn't boil over. Now this needs to cook for about an hour and a half, and I will tend it and stir it every 10 or 15 minutes or so. It takes a while for barley to cook, and again, we want all the flavors to meld together and become super tasty. So we'll check back in a bit. All right, this has been cooking for well over an hour. As you can see, it's gotten thick. The barley is cooked. It's got this lovely deep color to it, and it smells really good. I guess now would be the time for me to fish out my bay leaves. Hey, where you at in here? Or I can just get them as we serve it up. The next step is to add a couple shakes of Worcestershire sauce, and then we will garnish it with parsley when we serve it. Okay, let's get a little in a bowl. Well, maybe I'll get a little more. It looks so good. Okay, let me turn that down. Add a little parsley to it. All right. It's volcanic. I'm almost afraid to take a bite of it at this temperature, but we'll see. Okay, that's really good. The tomato paste adds a delicious richness to it, a little tang. Worcestershire adds a nice ending. I think this is what my family will be having for dinner tonight, along with some crusty bread and the rest of the wine that didn't go in the stew. Let me just recap what we did today. We started out making a very simple Parmesan soup with tiny pasta and peas, and then we moved on and made a garlicky white bean soup, and we ended with this beef and barley stew. So you see that two of the recipes we made were fast soups, very quick and easy. This one took a little more time. There's no wrong or right way to make soup, really. You can use all kinds of bases for soup. You can use a water base, you could use broth, stock, chicken broth, pork broth, ham broth, beef broth, or vegetarian soup. And then you could also get into miso soups too. I mean, there are so many varieties available. Fortunately, the library has a vast collection online through Hoopla of cookbooks to browse and start cooking. Next month, we're going to focus on some holiday appetizers. Hopefully we will be able to have holiday parties again soon, but if not, we can always just enjoy our own at-home parties with our own family. We'll see you next time.